Good morning. My name is Daniel. I'm one of the pastors here at Kindred. Some people also call me Dinko. You've probably heard that from the stage from folks before. Such a blessing to be together again. Welcome back, beloved sisters. I hear that the women's retreat went very well. I look forward to hearing more about it from all of you. And as you just saw in our sermon bumper, we're returning to our Crooked Crowns series in 1 Samuel, 1 and 2 Samuel. And we'll be reading from 1 Samuel 18, verses 6 through 16. We're going a little bit out of order. If you were with us the last few weeks, we're kind of going backwards a little bit. But this is Saul's mental, emotional descent as he looks upon David with anger and fear. Let's read this together. 1 Samuel 18, starting from verse 6. This is the reading of God's holy word. Let's give our attention and reverence. I'll read this for us. As they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistine, Goliath, the woman came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing, to meet King Saul with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated, Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. He said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. And what more can he have but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day on. The next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. David was Saul's musician. Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall. But David evaded him twice. Saul was afraid of David, because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence, and made him a commander of 1,000. And David went out and came in battle before the people. And David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in fearful awe of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them, once again in battle. This is God's word. You know, if you've been tracking with us in the Crooked Crown series, you know by now that the way we interpret the story of 1 Samuel is we recognize we're not the hero of the story. You and I are not the hero of the story. When we see David valiantly conquering, defeating Goliath, when we see Jonathan being that faithful, supremely faithful covenant friend, it points us not to ourselves, but to our true hero, our true faithful friend, Jesus. And if you and I are like anyone in this story, you probably heard me say, it's safe to say we're usually more like Saul than anyone else. Maybe some of us relate to Saul more than others of us do. But regardless of the degree, Saul is often a mirror into all of our hearts. Do you get jealous? Do you get insecure? Do you read into things a little bit too much and jump to conclusions? Then you're like Saul. Do you ever lash out? Whether it's full-on anger, raised voices, critical, harsh words, or maybe even a quiet, colder anger, withdrawal, the cold shoulder, the silent treatment. If so, then you're like Saul. Do you ever wish failure on people instead of success? I know that one, we'd never really say it out loud, but deep down, if you're honest with yourself, do you ever feel good about other people's failure? Then you're like Saul. And as the title of this sermon says, Sauls need help. It's not a typo. Sauls need help. People like Saul, Sauls like us, need help. We need to be able to admit that we need and go further and ask for help. We need the help that God provides through the gospel, through other people. And sadly, Saul, he needs help in this story, but he's not really, doesn't seem to be looking for it. We definitely don't see him going to God. He doesn't seem to be abiding in anyone else's counsel for that matter. And he just descends further and further into his fear and his anger. And to really get a good insight into the help that Sauls need, Sauls like us, I'll be examining two really interesting points of interpretation in this text. Look with me to verses 8 and 9 of our text. Saul was very angry. This saying displeased him. They have ascribed to David 10,000s. To me, they have ascribed thousands. And what more can he have but the kingdom? And he looks on David with a jealous, threatened eye from that point forward. After the men return from battle, the grateful women, they come back. They're the ones that remained home. They come outside and they're singing this song. Saul has slayed his thousands, David his tens of thousands. And what's really, really important to note as interpreters of the scriptures is this song is not meant to be a dig on Saul. They are not throwing shade, right? Throughout the Old Testament, we often see 1,000 and 10,000 paired together. It's a common thing to see. 1,000, 10,000, you hear both. And whenever you hear those phrases with 1,000 and 10,000 in the same sense, the point usually isn't to compare and contrast, but rather they're kind of used synonymously. Because at the end of the day, whether we're talking about 1,000 or 10,000, those are both just really big numbers, right? To slay 1,000 enemies, to slay 10,000 enemies is both slaying a lot of people in battle. And Hebrew scholars will tell you the point of this song is basically saying, our heroes have defeated many, many of our enemies. That's what some people, some interpreters, some Hebrew experts will tell you is the point of the song. But Saul, he takes it in the worst possible way. Saul hears this song, and he jumps to the worst possible conclusion. He basically says, they're saying that David did more than me. David did better than me. David is better than me. And then he goes even further, right? He says, and David's going to take the kingdom. Now David's going to take the kingdom. There's some truth to that, though. We know that by this point in the story, Saul has already heard the prophecy from Samuel that he has been rejected as the king, that a man after God's own heart is now going to come and be the new king soon enough. So there's truth to it. But he takes that from this song that's just meant to be a grateful, rejoicing song. And whether or not the women are comparing Saul and David, we know Saul is comparing Saul and David. And it reveals a lot about what's going on in his heart. You probably have heard it said, several people have said this, that comparison is the thief of joy. You've probably heard that before. Comparison is the thief of joy. And I will say, comparison doesn't have to be the thief of joy. But it is, I'm the first to admit, it is easy for it to become the thief of joy. That's why it's important to ask ourselves, what's happening in my heart as I make this comparison? Whatever I'm comparing myself to others with, what's going on in my heart? What's happening? Right? And sometimes, you just have to say, you know what, I'm going to remove the thing that's making me compare. I've heard many different people share with me throughout the years, I'm just taking a break from social media because it's just, there's something going on in my heart when I'm on it. I'm like comparing, I'm feeling less than, stuff like that. And I don't think it's a bad idea. Take a break then. Take a break from it. But it's not enough to just turn off the phone. We got to ask ourselves, what is ultimately happening in my heart? What's happening in the deeper parts, beyond just the surface circumstances, beyond just the surface, more superficial feelings? But what's happening deep down inside? For Saul, I think there was a great desire for glory. I think that's clear throughout the whole story of 1 Samuel. Anytime we see it talking about Saul, he has this great desire for the glory that only God should be getting. He's protective of his kingdom, right? Because for him, God's kingdom, the kingdom of Israel, is his kingdom. This is my kingdom. None of us may say it out loud, like, I want glory. I remember one of my nieces, when she was much younger, many years ago. I don't even remember the details, but it was like the situation where she missed out on this opportunity to get public recognition at school for some cool thing that she did. And I was like, it's okay. You don't have to get that recognition. And she said, but I want the glory. And she just flat out said it. I was like, I kind of cracked up and I turned it into this like pastor spiritual moment, like God gets the glory. But it was just so amusing to me because at her young age, it was many years ago, she wasn't ashamed to just say it. I want the glory. I want glory. I want to be glorified. And yeah, we're too sophisticated now. We're too mindful now to say that out loud. But maybe there is something still deep in our hearts that's saying, but I want glory. I want glory. It's not lost on me. We have a sister named Glory in this church. We're not talking about her. We're talking about the glory that only God deserves. And you know what makes this comparison between David and Saul so unbearable for Saul? Is he's grasping for power, he's grasping for glory, and he does not have the humility to say, good for David. Let's say the women are straight up just comparing the two. Saul 1,000, David 10,000. He does not have the ability. Remember I said comparison doesn't have to be the thief of joy. With humility, you can say, good for David. His victory is my victory. It reminds me of what my favorite Puritan preacher once wrote, Thomas Watson. He writes this: a humble man, a humble woman, is content to be outshone by others in gifts and esteem, so that the crown of Christ may shine the brighter. This is the humble man's motto: let me decrease, let Christ increase. It is his desire that Christ should be exalted, and if this is affected, whoever is the instrument, he rejoices. A humble Christian is content to be laid aside if God has any other tools to work with which may bring him more glory. I think we all want to be this humble person. Saul clearly is not, and Saul is grasping for power. He doesn't want anyone to outshine him. And this leads to detrimental effects. I don't know why, but as I was just thinking about Saul, reading about Saul, I couldn't get out of my mind this documentary that I watched that at face value has almost nothing to do with Saul or someone like Saul. It was the story of the 90s pop group Milli Vanilli. I forget which streaming service this was. Some of you really have no idea what I'm talking about. Milli Vanilli was this 90s pop group where it was this duo, two guys, and they reached international fame. They were so famous. They had this great song. I still love that song, Blame It on the Rain. But it got discovered at some point after they were famous for a little while that they were not actually the ones singing on the record. And it got exposed. They immediately just got, it was like cancellation before there was cancellation. No one liked them anymore. In fact, and it just kind of became like the butt of jokes. They were a punchline from that point forward, and everyone was making fun of them. Every comedy thing was making fun of them. But when you hear the story of this group, it's actually a lot more tragic. It's not just like a funny story. One of that duo, a man named Rob Pilatus, he actually eventually ended up dying of a drug and alcohol overdose. And his story actually starts off sadly too, because he was an orphan and he faced racism as a black man growing up in Germany. And so you could just imagine, he had this like big hole in his heart, and then the moment he tasted fame, applause, love, he would do anything to hold on to that. He would do anything to make that grow, even if it meant living a lie, lip-syncing a lie. Now, of course, mind you, this is just part of the story where there was a lot of exploitation involved by people in power, which is to be expected. But the heart motivations are clear when you listen to their story, especially people closest to them, that there was this desire for glory that drove everything. And once everything fell apart, once the fame was gone, just everything was gone. We may never experience international fame or ever be a king of a whole nation, but we do need to ask ourselves, what do I need help with when it comes to that deep, deep hole in my heart that wants glory, that wants affirmation and applause. Ultimately, that wants love. And we have to ask ourselves that, especially when we find ourselves comparing, jumping to conclusions, feeling threatened, feeling insecure. Look with me also to this next part of our passage, another interesting interpretational point, if you will. Verses 10 and 11. The next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved. Literally, the word in Hebrew is he prophesied within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall. But David evaded him twice. In Crooked Crowns in 1 Samuel, this isn't the first time we're seeing this harmful spirit from God rush upon Saul. And we got to be clear once again, this is not a demon, right? This is not demon possession. Demons, if you watch any scary movies, it's consistent with the Bible. Demons deceive, they lie, they trick. Satan is the father of lies, after all. But this spirit is a spirit from God. And even if it is a harmful and troubling spirit, it's a spirit of truth. It's telling Saul of his rejection. Rejection from the kingship, not necessarily rejection from God himself. And of course, this was already told to Saul by the prophet Samuel, who is now long gone. And I think it is interesting that in this verse, the verb is Saul prophesied. I think that's interesting because prophecy, as hopefully you all know, if it's real, it is true. Real prophecy is always true. And there's a sense that I get from this passage, especially when we see this raving and what's happening with Saul, is the truth is coming out. The truth is coming out. True colors are coming out. His heart is being revealed. And here's the truth. He's angry. He's scared. And he throws his spear at David, like as a expression of all that. Just he can't help himself. He's like bottled up, and that's how it comes out. And it's funny, isn't it? He says, whether he's saying it out loud or just in his head, I will pin David to the wall. Like, think about that with me for a second. Here's Saul throwing a spear at David on multiple occasions, it tells us. Eventually, he even throws one at Jonathan, his own son, as you heard in a previous message. And he says, I'm going to pin him to the wall with my spear, like, through his cloak or whatever, right? You got to really trust your spear-throwing abilities to do that. I mean, Saul must have really thought of himself as a great spear thrower. But you also have to think, isn't this a little bit of a self-justification going on? He's like, yeah, all I want to do is pin him to the wall. But it's this reckless lashing out, this reckless expression of his anger. Not really concerned about the real, very real, fatally real harm he might cause. Clearly, Saul has a spear-throwing problem. He has a spear-throwing problem. It's in his MO. And the first time he threw that spear, and even more so the second time he threw that spear, Saul or someone in his life should have been asking, what's going on? Saul, what is going, you threw it once, you threw it twice, you threw it 3 times. What is going on? What's going on inside? What's going on with you? Whether it's Saul asking himself that or someone around him asking him that. King Saul, I know you're the king, but throwing spears at people it's too much. It's revealing something deeper that we need to talk about. And we all have to admit, we all have our own spear-throwing problems, right? You may not actually throw spears. I hope none of you throw spears, literal spears, but we all have our own version of that, where we lash out, whether it's overt anger or cold withdrawal, harsh words, whatever it may be. And they always reveal something deeper. It is not just, it happened to me in that moment. That's why I did what I did. It always reveals something deeper. The pastors of Kindred, as well as some other pastors that are dear to us, we had the opportunity this past week to join a pastoral health seminar led by this one older pastor, really wise man. And He shared a story of some of his own recent issues, where he was saying how there was this hard thing that happened. It was kind of this incident, this episode for him. And an older mentor of his counseled him with these words. And I wrote it down because it was good, and it was important for all of us, not just pastors, to ask ourselves. And that older mentor said, this thing happened to you. You did this thing, this kind of, thing that maybe you're embarrassed by, ashamed of. And he said, the problems are deeper than the immediate issue. Maybe it's not just about getting through this current season, but it's about the bigger, deeper, broader patterns, unhealthy patterns that have been going on for this whole time. And it was such a revelation for him. Maybe straightforward, maybe obvious, but we need someone to say that to us sometimes. It's not just about, it's just what's happening right here on the surface in your life right now, just this one moment. But maybe there's a deeper, broader pattern that we got to address. That big fight. Those words you said that you've never said before and now you regret. Maybe you're more irritable than you used to be. Maybe you're more critical than you used to be. Please don't just chalk it up to circumstances. These are God-given check engine lights. When you see a check engine light on your dashboard while you're driving, you don't say, it's because it's raining outside. That's why the check engine light came on. It's because the road is bumpy. That's why the check engine light came on. No, you go, there must be something wrong with my car. I'm not going to throw away my car. It's not like my car's an absolute piece of junk now, but there's something wrong, and I need to diagnose that, get a diagnosis for that, and they get to the root of the issue at the dealership, the mechanic, whatever. And is this not the way our hearts and minds also work? When you find yourself throwing that spear yet again, please don't just blame it on the rain. Please don't blame it on the road. There's something deeper that we need to look at. Some of you know this about me, that I really love analyzing celebrity apologies. I've shared this before from the pulpit. Yes, I'm a weirdo, yes. I just love analyzing them because they're so interesting to me. And I have to confess, there's an air of judgment in my heart as I read them. But my favorite line in celebrity apologies is, "This is not indicative of who I truly am." That's my favorite line. This is not indicative of who I truly am. And it's like, no, this is precisely who you truly are. And now you're ashamed or embarrassed. You have to put a public apology because the whole world got a glimpse of who you truly, really are. These are moments of revealing deeper things. Once again, you don't have to be a celebrity or a king. And speaking of apologies, I came across this gem from a marriage book that I once read through with one of my small groups. Really, really good gem. I can't believe I forgot about this, and then I read it again, and I said, this is so good, from an author named Winston Smith. And here's what he says. It doesn't just apply to marriages. He says, don't stop at, "I'm sorry I lost my temper with you." Dig deeper. Exactly how did you lose your temper? I raised my voice. I slammed the door. I know that's very scary. What was going on in your heart? I was feeling sorry for myself, and I wanted you to feel sorry for me too. I didn't get what I wanted, so I punished you with my anger. That was selfish and wrong. And as I read that apology, I'm like, man, that's so good. But my reflection isn't like just, oh yeah, I'll do that. I myself will just do that from now on. No, here my reflection is, that is a healthy person. That is such a healthy person. Oh my goodness, that is a healthy person. I wish all of us can apologize like that. I want to apologize more like that. And it's not just about apologies. It's this healthiness of looking deeper. Can I look deeper? Can I take a moment to pause and just look deeper? What is going on in me that made me do that caused me to do that? Not just, I'm sorry I lost my temper. And we need help to get to a place like that. It does not just come naturally. It does not just come by yourself. One clear way throughout 1 Samuel that we see the ways that God helps, especially David, is through other people. God helps through other people again and again and again. Sure, there's times when it's very supernatural. God gives David these amazing victories despite all the odds against him. Sure, of course, God does that too. But so often in this story, we find, how is God helping David? It's just through other people. These are God-given helps. Through Jonathan, through his wife Michal, eventually through Samuel. And on the other hand, Saul is very much alone at this point. Saul doesn't appear to be seeking any kind of help. He's getting more and more isolated instead as he descends further and further into his emotional and mental dysfunction. And that really is a big difference between David and Saul. David is not alone. And Saul is not looking to do anything about it, the fact that he's alone. We need to learn how to ask for help, whether it's through professional therapy, whether it's just through a conversation with someone you know and trust, you know that they love you and they're safe for you, whether it's a pastor, an older brother, or not even older, just a brother, a sister. And I know sometimes some of you may have that in spades. Praise be to God. But others of you, maybe you're like, I don't even know where to begin. And we are here. This church is here to help you with that. As we talk about things like small groups, as we talk about, I myself would love to get to know you a little better through intro group if you're new to Kindred, and then eventually have you join our small groups. We need the help that God provides through other people. Sometimes you may be saying the most obvious thing in the world about what's going on in your heart, but sometimes you just got to say it out loud to another person to process, for it to actually start ruminating and maturing that idea in your heart. Oh, how we need the help that God provides through other people. I had a chance to briefly visit the women's retreat yesterday afternoon, and I'll tell you, the sisters, man, they just seemed so vibrant, full of life. I think all it took was just one weekend away from their husbands to get that way. All joking aside, I wasn't surprised, obviously, to see just them so vibrant together. And once again, I look forward to hearing more about how it went. But I'm not surprised. These sisters coming together, centered upon Christ. And I know for a fact, at least for some of them, some deep pains were shared as well. Some great moments of even like counseling, if you will. How could that not be good? How could that not be helpful? It made me look forward to our men's retreat all the more. I promise, it's not just a promo. I'm so excited for our men's retreat after I saw what was going on at the women's retreat. God helps through people. Please ask for help when you need it. We have helpers all around us. Sometimes all it takes is for us to ask. And God also helps profoundly through his gospel. And of course, sometimes we need other people to point us to the gospel. Saul, he eventually would try to get David killed in more sophisticated ways than just throwing a spear at him. He would, in verse 21, which we did not read, he would employ his own daughter, Michal, to be a snare for him. And this idea of, if you really want to marry my daughter, I'm going to send you on these suicide missions, hoping that other people will kill David. He doesn't want to be the one to do it. He hopes like the Philistines kill David. And it's truly sad how conniving and hateful Saul gets due to his unchecked, unreflected fear and anger. But you know what's sadder? Perhaps even more sadder is, David doesn't do something, or rather, David does something pretty similar later on, many, many years later. David, too, would eventually hatch a similar plot to get someone else by the name of Uriah the Hittite killed. David would do similar deeds, even though he was the man after God's own heart. But the difference between David and Saul is that David would run to the Lord in repentance. He would run to the forgiveness of sins that comes by the grace of God and his mercy. As we think about our own patterns, as we think about our own dysfunctions even, We all have them. We all have them. It is easy to blame our parents, a condition, something from our past. And those all play vital, vital parts. And if we're never addressing those things, once again, be it through therapy, be it through brothers and sisters, we're not going to ever get the help we need. But even as we admit they all play a part, we also have to recognize our sin plays a part. We have to account for our sin. Even David, the man after God's own heart, the great king who wrote all the psalms of worship and praise to God, or who wrote so many of them, rather, even he had to confess and account for his sins. And that's why we need a greater king than David. We need a king whose crooked crown, whose only crooked crown, was a crown of thorns. We need a king who didn't grasp for power, but was willing to lay down his power, lay down his glory, to be a friend to sinners and a king to the broken. Philippians 2:6-8 says this, that Jesus, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. God helps us through many, many different ways. He helps us through many, many different people. We need other people. But God helps us especially through this person, this king, who laid himself down to make sons and daughters out of you and I want to close with just a reference to Luke 19, the parable of the minas. I love this parable. It's a parable that Jesus gives where he shares the story of this ruler giving 1 mina, a unit of currency, to 10 different people. And they all do different things with it. Some people take that 1 mina, multiply it to 10. Another guy, he takes 1 mina, multiplies it to 5. And the assumption is various people did various things with it, various levels of multiplication. And he goes to each and every one of them, the ruler, who represents God, of course. And to every single one, he says, well done, good and faithful servant. He never does he say, how come he made 10, but you made 5? No, to each and every single one, he says, well done, good and faithful servant. You know, the only person he doesn't say that to is the one who didn't do anything with it. And as we close, as we think about how Sauls like us need help, I want to remind you of the help or the God who gives us help. God is not a God who ever says to us, how much? God didn't say how much. God didn't say, how much faith do you have? How much are you my son? How much are you my daughter? How much did you do for me? God is a God who says, well done, good and faithful servant. You know why? Because Jesus, because of our great King. If your faith is in him, if your trust is in his life, his death, his resurrection, and you're united to him in those things because of your faith in him, there's nothing more you can do. There's nothing more you can do to get you to love him more. To get him to love you more. There's nothing more you could do to have him be more of a father to you, to have him be more generous to you, to have him be more gentle with you. You have the perfect record of Christ now on your record. You have the perfect adoption provided by Christ. And now you belong to this Father. And I do pray and hope that as we consider all the help we need, as we consider what is going on in my heart, what is going on in my Saul-like heart, as you come and receive, reflect and recognize and receive all the helps that God has for you, and as you really receive them, would you receive God's fatherhood? Would you receive This love that does not say, how much did you give? How much do you have for me? But a fatherhood that says, well done, good and faithful servant. Let's pray. Would you come before the Lord now? I'm going to give you guys some time to really reflect, ask yourself, and ask God, what are the spears that I hurl? What does it reveal of what's happening deeper inside? Would you come to God with that? But would you also ask God for the next steps, the many helps that God provides? And would you run to a Father who never asks you, how come you didn't do more? How come you didn't do as much as him? How come you didn't do as much as her? A Father that says, well done. Please come to the Lord at this time with those things. And after some good long moments, our worship team will lead us in a song of response.